I'm going INBrief with Chloe Brayne, Head of Private Equity and Unlisted Assets at CFS. Chloe, thank you very much for participating in the Inside Network's Alternatives Symposium Hunter Valley.
Thank you very much for having me.
It's a pleasure. Chloe, how are current market conditions, including rising interest rates and inflation, influencing how investors are approaching both private equity and unlisted assets in general?
I think it's a really interesting time for the unlisted space. I think, first of all, you're in a world where you've got higher interest rates, higher inflationary environment, which is also being fueled by, obviously, geopolitical situations that are happening, both with elections but also more generally geographic conflict. I think what that's actually doing is driving up the cost of equity. In combination with that, you've got a lot of dry powder out, which is meaning that effectively a lot of people are looking to place money and to deploy into private markets. But then with a high cost of equity, you've got a world where investors are starting to see a gap between what assets are transacting for and what people are willing to pay. I think it's a unique time in the cycle, therefore, for people to looking to deploy into that sector.
Private equity investments obviously come with some unique risks, such as illiquidity and valuation challenges, to name the top two. How do you manage these risks, particularly when you're balancing them with the need for portfolio growth?
I think particularly on the valuation front, one thing that's really important when you're holding unlisted assets in a portfolio is to make sure that you've got really good transparency of reporting and a really in-depth understanding of those assets that sit within the portfolio, so you can also form your own views around valuation. We have quarterly valuations in our portfolio and valuations committees that are obviously dedicated towards making sure that we're thinking about valuation first and foremost, and that's a really big part of how we invest.
What about the role of alternative assets within portfolios? How do you envision that role evolving over the next 5 to 10 years, and what impact will that have on portfolios?
I think what we're seeing in the market is a really big shift towards private market assets for some of the reasons I mentioned earlier. You're seeing people really looking towards private assets to get the benefit of diversification and resilience of the portfolio. Private assets also bring in medium risk returns, which is, I guess, a complementary factor to other asset classes as well. So I think over the next sort of 5 to 10 years, you will see people increasing their private markets exposure. Obviously, from a liquidity perspective, there's a piece there around making sure that people are getting access to those assets in a way that they can hold them in their portfolio, and that's something that we're also focused on offering innovative solutions for.
Obviously, there's increasing interest in ESG factors or people talking about sustainability more broadly in general. Those factors, how are you integrating those considerations into your strategy for private equity and unlisted assets?
ESG is a really important factor for us. We think that it goes fundamentally to value of underlying assets, and it's something we actively screen for when we're looking at bringing new assets into the portfolio. We have an ESG framework that we look for. We obviously look to work with our managers to make sure that they're also targeting net zero targets. We're looking particularly to do a 30% reduction in greenhouse gases by 2030 in the portfolio, and that's something that's very much front of mind. What that means practically is that we're also looking for reporting in our underlying assets to make sure we're getting information around how those assets are tracking towards those goals. We have existing investments in ESG specific assets, and we've got an ESG sleeve through Thrive Plus. It's something that's very front of mind for us at CFS.
Chloe Brayne from CFS, again, thank you very much for participating in our event. It's a great pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much.